Peace to all. This is Ariya Shalara, and you are tuned into Shadow in the Valley. I'm almost scared to say the date. It's February 2nd, 2016. Due to some technical difficulties, this is a remake of a podcast that I already had done last week, Thursday, January. In January. So either way, my previous podcasts have been based on nutrition and how it plays a role in breaking the school to prison pipeline, as well as discussions that have focused on how the corruptive behaviors of teachers and school staff contribute to the cycle of the school to prison pipeline, and how to point out the behaviors and how to make changes to the systems that are in place. In light of the Jersey City community making efforts to end the violence and improve police-community relations to eliminate the police brutality and corruption that we have been seeing in the TV and the media, I had sat down with a gentleman named Michael A. Wood Jr. How I found him, I was listening to Joe Rogan's podcast and the Joe Rogan Experience, number 670, and I heard it in mid-2015. I ignored it. I was like, a police officer talking about corruption. Okay, yeah, whatever, So I came back to it again. It was played for me again in December, and I kind of sat up because I heard what this officer was saying, and it kind of hit home. I was like, okay, he's talking about something that's real. I'm going to give it a try to listen to it, later on when I have some time to really get down and listen. So I had some time, about 3 weeks now, and I sat down and I listened to what Michael had to say. And I got to say, I was like, I couldn't believe that this is an officer saying this, someone that was actually in the department that's actually admitting that there's a problem, When I heard what he said, it really hit home. I don't like to say victim, but I have experienced police brutality. So, when I was 16 years old, I was taken from the front of my school where I was standing talking to my friends, minding my business, and an officer came up to me, basically gave me the rundown of, what are you doing here? I'm like, I'm going to school here. I go to school here. I'm talking to my friends, I have the right to be on school property. And he told me, I'm just waiting for the bus. I'm waiting for the bus. So he told me, okay, you're waiting for the bus, get on the bus stop. Okay, well, I really don't have to because I'm on school property. I'm not attending the after school program that I'm usually going to. I can stand here. I go to school here. He insisted, he just stood, like hovering over me. Okay, you want to be a wise guy? No, I don't want to be a wise guy. I'm not a guy at all. I didn't say that, but in my head, I'm like, I'm not a guy. I'm thinking this man, is thinking I'm a boy because I had on a hoodie and baggy jeans. I was just a poor young teen, a poor young black teen in going to school, So you wear a hoodie and jeans. And as I was walking away, he grabbed me. I realized it was not a hand that was on my wrist. It was a handcuff, So as I'm pulling away, I'm seeing this handcuff and I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting arrested for what? And I was thrown into the back of a police car after I was subdued by about 3 or 4 police officers, thrown into the car on top of this other guy that was in the car, and taken down to the holding place where they put the youth downtown Jersey City. And I was held there in the cell with the other gentleman, with the gentleman that was in the vehicle in the back seat. And he's like, it's going to be okay. But either way, after sitting there for hours, about 2 hours, my parents were never called. And my parents didn't know this happened to me until I got home. The police then, after the 2 hours of sitting there in a cell, and I guess they realized I was a girl once I gave them my social security number, and they took me out of the cell. So, after that happened, they took me back to the school, and I had to make my way home. My parents didn't know about this until I got home, and it was a really traumatizing ordeal. But we had a lawyer. As I was getting older, the process is so long. I turned 18, and I never went back to the lawyer's office to finish anything like that. I never went to trial, and excuse me, and I just, throughout the years, I thought about the money. I thought about, I could have been rich, millions of dollars, but that wouldn't have took away the psychological damage that I experienced. I had fear of police officers. Even though I have friends that are police officers, I've come across police officers that are really kind, but it's just, that's a trauma. And I know that anything can come off at any point, but either way, I took this bold step, and I started following Michael on Twitter, and I followed him about 2 days, and I said, you know what, this is it. I'm gonna do it. I have a platform to help other people. I have a platform to have this man's message reach other ears that I feel is very important, and I feel is very important for us that are victims to reach out to police officers that are willing to talk to us. Michael, I gave him a message on Twitter, and I was kind of like hoping that he ignored it. And because of, the sensitivity of I thought he was going to be really skeptical because of the sensitivity of the topic. So I kind of was like, okay, I didn't really want to talk to a police officer, for my own personal reasons, but, I did it anyway. It took about an hour. I thought it was going to be a couple of days before he reached back. It was an hour. I ignored that email for 5 hours. Oh my God, he actually answered, and I didn't know what to say. I didn't know where to begin. So I said, I want to do a podcast with you. And he was like, sure, I'm here for you. And I'm like, okay. It was like, of course, I'm here for you. And he dropped his number, and I was like, oh, okay. So I was like, well, I'll call you the next day, and I did. And we had a conversation, and it was very therapeutic to speak to someone and actually thank him for, coming forth and showing, giving the courage to other officers to say, okay, yes, I did do these things. Yes, it's something that I was told I needed to do. And, the force of these things, may have occurred from other reasons, but there is a problem. And it's not just a surface problem. So I feel like it's very important for his message to come out to you guys. The original recording was damaged because of some technical difficulties on my behalf. I forgot to record my side of the conversation, and it's very unfortunate that I did that. I do apologize to Michael, and I appreciate his time. I lost the audio on my side, but everything that Michael's going to say is his original answers. So I'm just going to narrate kind of and give you the topics that we touched on, and give you give you Michael's real responses. These are uncut responses, aside from, any other things that he may have been responding to that we couldn't fill in. Some respective editing is done. And, this message is really, truly something I feel everyone needs to hear. And I think it's important that we have these types of discussions. I can't express that enough, that we need to talk to each other. And, we need to step away from any type of negative labels that have been placed on others and ourselves. And, in order for us to heal as a people, as a nation, so that we can begin to fix a lot of the things that are in place, And with that being said, I just want to ask this one question. How can Michael A. Wood Jr. be a whistleblower when he is touching on a topic that has already had the foghorn blown? So, some of the members of my audience may have heard of his efforts to reduce the corruption that goes on in the African American community in Baltimore and across the nation when he tweeted some of the injustices he personally witnessed during his early years with the Baltimore Police Department. Introducing Michael A. Wood Jr. Thank you for joining me and welcome to Jersey City virtually. I thank you for taking out time to join us and share the information that you will bring that will bring some light to changes that need to occur in both the police and legal systems that is currently in place across the nation.
Oh, well, thanks for having me.
I then proceeded to introduce Michael to Imam Wali and a member of our audience, Alan, who is in the Jersey City community, as well as another audience member who was anonymous. I told Michael my story, and this was his response.
Well, I hope that the idea that you did approach me is an opening the door for yourself, as well as it is to stand that, like, look, I'm serious. We're going to have this discussion and we're going to move forward and we're going to change this, because stories like yours, they just add on to this piling evidence that goes around this whole nation, whether you want to go back to Rodney King or you want to go back to slavery, you want to go to lynchings. It's this progression where American society and really, I guess, white supremacy, even though people hate when I say the word, but that has ignored the black community. And I want you to know I say black because just because you're from Africa, if you're not from Africa and you just look black, you're still treated the same way. So I always want to include everybody in that, even if you are, if you're, whether you're from Africa or you're from the Caribbean or some other place where they consider black, they're going to treat you the same exact way. So it's not unique to the African American community. Is unique to what America perceives as those that they can pick on, and that would be what they have classified as black. So you could be more an African American to get into black. But so this piling evidence, and that's what's made me have this shock. Like, I got to this point not from some great intelligent point, from some infinite knowledge that like other people don't have. I got to this point because I watched the things transpire in front of me, and I saw the evidence in my scholarly studies, and it's just the logical conclusion. And that's why it's like, why is it that anyone wants to listen to me when this is just the evidence? Did it really take this long for a young white cop to come out and say something? That's shocking.
Imam Wali then asked, do you see the use of the terms black and white as promoting white supremacy, which should be a concern of the community and something he thinks police officers should be aware of? Which would give them a different perspective of looking at the differences in communities and how to treat the citizens of the different communities in regard to the law and their approach to the individual.
Yeah, I think you're making a really good point that I think people probably have glossed over, and I don't think I've really ever thought about it myself. But here you have this idea that we have essentially criminalized blackness. And so if blackness, which is just a human trait, is being criminalized, then you're being criminal for criminalizing just being human. Like that's like one of those weird circles that we start talking about that people want to start thinking, oh, you're crazy. But if you think about it just for a couple minutes, you're right. That is what is happening. It should be considered criminal. I mean, like what's happening in Flint or other black cities, that should be criminal. Like what we were doing was criminal in morality, but in practicality, the whole system has been drawn up so that these things actually aren't illegal. This is the system. Just like everything Hitler did was legal. That's a really bad idea for us to have in our head, like what is legal and what is criminal.
Imam Wali then asked, as a police officer or a former police officer, would it be better if one were to view the people of the community as their countrymen instead of using the terms black or white, which supports white supremacy? If we say our European countrymen, African American countrymen, Italian countrymen, etc., then we would have more of an endearment to one another. And then we would say, I see the police officer seeing citizens as a human being and not just something they're going after because they feel alienated from the individual because of his race, ethnicity, or religion.
Yeah, I get your line of logic, and I think it's arguable. The objection that I have is that I grew up in a mixed community in Section 8, and it was one of those. So I'm a typical millennial where I grew up in this environment where we didn't see race. So we all got along. Nobody cared about whether somebody was black, white, Hispanic. We spoke different language, tall, short. We don't care. That's not really a big thing in our generation. But what happened was is I took that mentality into policing and blinded myself to the race differences, just trying to treat everyone the same. But if I treat everyone the same in a system that is structured to go against the black or minority period, then I won't see what I'm doing wrong because I'm following the rules of that system. So I think what you have is like the ideal goal. But for now, we have to stay with addressing this because we have to promote blackness. And so in order to promote blackness, we're going to have to identify what it is.
Imam Wali continued with the topic and stated, the terminology countrymen would endear us better than color. We are human beings and we should view each other as human beings, which he thinks would bring a better understanding in the police department, judicial system, and in the communities as we interact with one another.
Certainly, without a doubt. But I'm still going to push back on you that I think what you're talking about as a goal is wonderful. But if we remove that race checkbox right now, it won't stop Muhammad from not getting the idea on a resume. It won't stop, it won't be able to, it won't allow us to track what police are doing when they pull over cars if we don't specify these things. It won't allow us to rebuild the institution and see it for what it is. So, like, that's totally the end goal. But for now, we have to see it because if we don't see it, we can't address it. We're still stuck in this denial phase when it comes to police brutality. I've been talking about this stuff for 7 months since the sensationalism came out and people knew who my name was. I talked about it before then, and I was fighting it in the department since 2009. And through this whole time, I feel like I haven't gotten anywhere when it comes to the denial phase, and you can see it in the whole nation that a year, or has it been 2 years or a year? I don't even know since Mike Brown. I think it's been 2 years. And we don't have any real substantial changes from them. I mean, seriously, there's nothing. So if we don't just embrace this and fight it for now and say Black Lives Matter, then I don't know how we get to all lives mattering. You know what I mean?
I think Imam Wali was ready to see an end to racism and the fears that bring about the incidents of police brutality. This was a perfect opportunity for Mike to connect with our elders in our community and see a different side of what we think about police brutality. I chimed in and explained how I understand why we need to continue to use the terms black and white. I used the example of the police killings in 2015. There are more white people that get killed by police officers than individual races not grouped as black. However, when you group the ethnicities that are considered to be black, there are more black people killed than white people at a disproportional rate.
Right, it's dramatically disproportional. But what you're hitting on is as I hope you're getting. It seems like you're getting the argument. And so, what's important to understand is that you want to see people as all as one, and that they don't want them to treat others that way. So that's the idea. I mean, that's what empathy is. But to make your dad's argument, Muhammad, is that you would have to make the conclusion that the country would agree that the killing of Tamir Rice was wrong. And we don't see that. We see a black boy be murdered on a playground where he should be safe, where every kid is taught that they're safe. And a significant portion of this country does not see that as a wrong. They do not see Tamir as a human being. So or even as like, so they don't want that to happen to their kid, but they don't give a shit that it happened to Tamir. So I thought we have to get to. I feel like we have to get to this point where we have this idea in our head that America is this melting pot, and that's a wrong idea. It's a false ideology. What we are is like a tossed salad, a mixed salad, where we bring in all these other cultures. And if we start to look at us all as human and fellow countrymen or something like that, like I want that on an empathy level, but I'm afraid that if we do that, then what we're doing is assimilating and melting into white culture, and we'll lose all the wonderful things that can come over from Africa and black culture, where, that's why we have to have, February, so we can actually learn a little bit of it. That's why when we go down to urban environments and take a breathe in for the culture, instead of thinking of it as so bad and you really enjoy it. I want Mexican culture. I want all these things in here, and I want to partake in them. I don't want them to strive to be in the culture that I was in. I want to experience their culture. So I always just want to shy away from this mass integration of just being American or just being human. Like, I want us to love each other that way, but I really want us to embrace these wonderful things that are different about us.
Imam Wali agreed that as Americans, we should never shy away from our heritage and culture, that we should learn to respect and preserve our culture and where we come from, as well as others' cultures and where they come from. He thinks this adds to America the beautiful and not America the ugly.
Yeah, we all go back to Africa, right? So, I mean, if we really want to get down to it, it's where we're all from. So, like, trace it back and integrate these cultures. I don't know. I don't even know if I'm articulating what I'm trying to say.
I understood Mike and what he was trying to say. So, but I explained to him that many of us in the African American community don't even know where we come from. There's so much lost to the point where we don't know who we are.
Yeah, I'd rather you get it back and teach it to me. As a black thing, to be woke. Like, that's, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm being nostalgic and I'm not really thinking about it properly.
I think it is really important that we go back and find out who we are and use our ethnicity to identify us, to bring about the elimination of the terms black and white. Imam Wali revisited the topic of the black and white concept, contributing to white supremacy, stating that if police officers view a terminology as supporting white supremacy and then goes out and enforces it on the citizen, then there's a problem. He thinks that if an officer is religious, which he thinks that they should be due to the nature of their career, then they would view citizens as countrymen or humans with civil and human rights and treat us fairly as according to the law.
Yeah, I totally think you're giving us way too much credit. So I came from a culture, and as anyone does in America, that is so out here in the suburbs, people will complain about Black History Month, right? Not accounting for the fact, or say, why is there a BET? Well, because the other 427 channels are WET, and because the other 11 months are White History Month. I mean, like, why is that hard to argue? So the idea is in American culture that this is just normality. So I didn't really begin to see it for a while. So, for instance, we call black males number ones. That's what you do as a code. So, like, there's all these subliminal things, and you're put into these black neighborhoods. But in Baltimore, I mean, you got to understand, we have a majority black police department. While I'm talking about these things, we are talking about a majority black police department in a majority black city with a majority black council, with a majority with a black mayor, a black commissioner, a black lieutenant governor, a black attorney general, and a black president. So I'm following the system. Like, this is the system. And it took me a while. I was about it was maybe 5 years in that I just started to see that the policing goal was not going to achieve anything. Like what we were doing doesn't solve the problem. If anything, it makes the problem worse. So I was just trying to put my head around this because I'm doing a criminal justice degree at that time, and the scholarly research and the whole idea in criminal justice as even as education is still pushing all these things. They're talking about geographical focusing for police. But if you go back one couple more steps, and then you realize that you have hypersegregation, and this neighborhood is all black because laws were intentionally done to push blacks into this neighborhood and then take their resources away and then flood them with police so that when they have no resources and they try to do something, well, police are right there to grab them and constantly focus on them. So the whole, even scholarly, is pushing these ideas that I just started to realize were completely false. This is not the way we're going to stop crime. So what exactly are we doing here? And all those things are going through my mind, and I'm trying to figure it out. And at that time, I guess because I'm looking inward, I'm starting to see how the agency treats black officers. And so the black officers, they get punished more. They get the crappier jobs. They won't be pushed through the promotional systems. So I started to see that, and that's what I started to fight at first because I kind of fully understood that. It really was not until I was out of the department, had my management masters, and was working on my PhD, and was kind of on the other side of the badge where I could step back and really look at it, that I really began to see what you see.
I discussed with Mike that as a person that is biracial, when I first encountered an officer that was going to hurt me that had a white face, was kind of difficult for me to grasp because one of the first faces that ever loved me was white.
Right. Well, Muhammad, you're told your whole life that these are the good guys, right? Like, be a cop. These are the good guys. This is what we need. This is the thin blue line. It separates us from the good guys and the bad guys. I hate when I talk about this, but I understand that it's true from an outside perspective, that what I look like is a poster boy for the Marine Corps. I know I look like a poster boy for a cop. I get that. So that's what it was. What I was doing, I mean, I exemplified the poster boy. So how could what I was doing possibly be wrong? So that's where police are now. They're stuck in this, and they're not stepping back to see what it's wrong in general. I think a lot of these cops, when they listen to me, they do start to get it.
We asked Mike about the injustices he tweeted about that he witnessed.
You're saying these injustices that I saw. I want you to understand that what I saw was minor. And that's been one of my shocks, is that I'm like, man, these things were terrible in the way they ended up, but I didn't do anything illegal. I follow the rules. I mean, I even pushed some of the rules. And then when you're talking about what we see in, like, I didn't see these things of absolute corruption. They happened around me. And one day I realized that I had known 50 officers that were in prison or had been convicted of a criminal offense while they were officers. So that's when it took like that for me to be like, wait, because I didn't see those things take place. But I mean, obviously they took place. Like, what are we doing? So when you see that I saw that, somebody kicked a handcuffed suspect, these things are on the bottom of the list of really what takes place. And I that's been like a new revelation to me. I'm thinking, gosh, this is terrible that we're doing these things. And then it's like, wait, what I'm doing was nothing. So this whole system is what has to be completely reset. And I just want to jump back to something real quick, Mohammed, though. I want you, when you're talking about racism and policing, also please understand that the motivations for police violence, they're not rooted in racism. So the racism precedes the policing. It's just that the policing power exacerbates it. And that's why you see the disproportional aspect of black men, especially, they get 6 times as much in prison as a white male doing the same thing. So you see that because the racism exacerbates it. But now you're seeing police drench in and start to see everybody as the others. And when you see everybody as the others, I think that's why you're starting to see these more shootings and these more things on camera where it's like the camera's there, you're going to get caught. It's something about us that we have to change, like us as people.
We discussed why officers fall behind the blue line and don't speak out when they witness injustices or corruption from another officer.
Obviously, different people are going to have different motivations. But I think the biggest one is probably just that you would be ostracized and pushed out, because that's literally what happens. We had a guy named Joey Crystal who testified against some cops that were convicted of the offenses. They did the crimes, but Joey was run out of town, and he's kicked out of the department. He works in a small agency. Like, nothing's going to go good for your life. And especially if you think of a cop that's got like 18, 19 years on, and he's got all this invested in his retirement. People think that the retirement's like handed to you, but it's not. I mean, in Baltimore, we spend 10% of our salary every single paycheck on pension contributions, and you get your pension after doing all these times, and that's like part of the agreement. So these guys have 18 and 19 years, could have more, and you're essentially asking them to throw away everything, like even like this future that they've solidified for their children. So, like, I get why they don't. And one reason why I was able to speak out is because I was injured. I got lucky. Like, once you're injured, they can't really do anything to you. So, like, I know I wanted to look at them and I want to tell them, like, you have to speak up. You have to do this. You have to step out now. But I also understand why that can't be. So that's why I'm fighting, for Chicago, and to try and be a superintendent and get some power somewhere so I can create the systems that these guys can speak in. We have to fix the systems because they just don't have an avenue.
Imam Wali asked Mike about the injury that caused him to retire.
I just threw my shoulder out. So I had to have my shoulder reconstructed. I went back to work, and it came back out again when I went back to full duty. So what happened is, after I had my shoulder repaired, I was going lights and sirens to a call downtown. I went to take a left-hand turn, and I like reached across my body because my hand was on the steering wheel, and my shoulder popped out again. So my car went like up onto the sidewalk, and I was just like, man, there could have been, if there were people there, I would have hit somebody. So I was like, that's it. I have to go back in. And they said I need another surgery. So that I just wasn't going to do another surgery, and I left and decided that I was just going to. I thought I would have to teach. So I started working towards my PhD. That was my goal, and I wanted to just teach lower level, college students, and kind of get the sowing of the seeds of change in them. I didn't think that there would be a stage where I actually could.
We discussed why officers fall behind the blue line and don't speak out when they witness injustices or corruption from another officer. We discuss how people in all types of jobs look out for each other. However, being a police officer carries many expectations from society. I brought up the topic of how police officers, because they are human first, may fall into depression, alcoholism, or drug addiction, and asked Michael if there were resources that officers had access to through their departments.
Every agency is going to be slightly different, so I am speaking in broad terms. But it really, so that blue wall, I really think comes down to it's an us versus them mentality, and you're going to keep hearing that. But that's the thing, is you don't snitch on us's. You can snitch on them's, but you're not going to go against us. So that's why they can treat everybody else the way they is. It's this whole us versus them thing that we have in human nature that we have to evolve past. But so one of the biggest killers for addiction with cops is obviously alcoholism. But see, this is where you open up these big can of worms. Because if you're asking me, well, what do we do about alcoholism? Well, if a cop is an alcoholic, like, I don't think he deserves to be a cop. So then if he turns himself in for that, then if you can't get the right treatment or something, then you're going to get pushed out of the agency. And remember how much you've invested in that. So they're not going to want to openly do it. So it's usually because they get in so much trouble with alcohol that they're finally, it just becomes too much, and they end up doing something egregious and get terminated. And there's not an avenue for them to go to for treatment. So they'll put these avenues in. But really what happens is if you take any of these avenues, like you go to counseling or something like that, you'll be suspended. And while you're suspended, like, you won't get promoted or anything like that. And you'll put your career on hold for years and years and years. It could have dramatic effects. And then everyone, like, the culture is that military, paramilitary type of culture where they're going to look at you like you're weak. And so why I say it opens up a can of worms is because societally, we have this system where we think it's okay for alcohol and we keep marijuana illegal. And if cops were allowed to use marijuana, you wouldn't have this alcoholism problem. So, like, there's all these different avenues where you have all these different solutions, and all of them are right. Like, so your mental health avenue, that's right. How about we revisit our drug laws and we kind of think about what we're doing here, even if just for the sake of harm reduction. Like, you can make make whatever argument you want about whether drugs should be illegal or not, but the science is quite clear that we'd be in a better situation with legalization and regulation, and this is one of those things. It keeps coming in no matter where you go. So cops, you have the alcoholism, you have the stress that you're talking about, and cops are killed more by suicides than they are by guns on the streets. So we're obviously not looking at the actual problems to put systems in for these actual problems. It's going back to earlier. That's why I said criminal justice is this ideology. So if your goal is to stop these things, we actually know how to stop these things. We know how to treat alcoholism. You have the mental aspect. You have there's some promising drugs that are out there right now that can stop alcoholism. You know that protecting their career and giving them a safe avenue will help. You know that harm reduction through other medical treatments like marijuana or something like that you want to go with. That we know these things will have incremental benefits, but we don't do them because we're stuck in ideology.
Imam Wali then asked Michael if there was a way that other officers can identify police officers that have been drinking while on the job, or if they can identify if an officer is acting unjustly due to his alcohol problem.
It's hard for me to say, and I'm going to go with no. But so I'm not a drinker, so I was never like in the environments. I was never in like the, cops go out after work or something, go to the bar and drink. So I was never in that group. So I don't really know how much they were drinking or what was going on. I don't think so. I think it really comes down to the us versus them and the fear.
Imam Wali then asked if an officer is called to someone's home through a 911 call, if they were able to assess whether that person was under the influence of alcohol or drugs just by looking for identifiers throughout their home or the areas they're in.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. There's a significant portion of the population of 911 calls and stuff that are rooted in somebody being drunk, especially at nighttime or on the weekends. You have a significant portion of that. Other than alcohol, I'm not going to reach out and think that people that use other types of drugs or have other type of addictions necessarily call the police at a greater rate or have incidents at a greater rate. I think that's one of our misperceptions. Drug use is a good example of that, where black males get arrested for drug use all the time, but white males in the county use drugs at the same rate, if not more, statistically, and they never get attention drawn to them. So I don't think we have enough information to make conclusions or even hint at that because we don't collect the information. We're not a science.
Imam Wali then asked if a police officer sees someone swerving as they're driving down the road, don't they assume that this person is drunk and they pull them over?
Muhammad, you think cops pull cars over because of their actual violations? Maybe state troopers and highway patrol, maybe they pull cars over because of the violation that took place. But city cops, we don't do that. We identify a car that we want to pull over and then find the reason why.
We discuss police culture and how the injustices are present through all cities in the U.S. and how it runs deeper than just the police system.
So that's one of the things that people argue with me about pretty commonly, where they'll say, well, I'm only talking about my experiences in Baltimore, and it's just because Baltimore is so bad, and because I was doing drug work, and because I was in a major case squad, or because I was in the Eastern District as a supervisor, which is one of the most violent neighborhoods in the world. So they'll think that it's just that. And it's clearly not that. And we see it everywhere around the entire nation. It's the entire culture of the criminal justice system. Don't just stick with cops, because the cops and the correction officers will cover for each other. The state's attorneys are committing crimes to cover up for the crimes of cops. I'll sit there and I'll say it 1,000 times again. What the I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on his name, but the prosecutor in the Mike Brown killing, Darren Wilson, it was a criminal act what he did to bury that grand jury indictment, and I think it's a criminal act what Tamir's Rice murder is being covered up with by those state's attorneys. Those state's attorneys are committing crimes to protect that blue wall as well.
So the problem isn't just with the police; it's the entire judicial system, and police officers are just in the front grounds.
Yeah, like cops are just pawns, and cops don't. A lot of them don't think beyond being a pawn. So they're just like, cops say that. How many times have you heard a cop say, "I don't make the rules, I just follow them"? And like, again, everything that the cops that worked for Hitler did, it was all legal. This is not your standard of justice. Is what is legal. This is a ridiculous idea, but that's what invades policing. Is they're just pawns doing their job, and they're okay with that. And obviously, I'm not okay with that. So we have to, like, this is command. I hate that we even do that. Like, we look at these officers and we think, what are they doing wrong? And look at these evil cops. Well, those cops aren't putting themselves in that situation. They're not making the laws to go after the drug offenders. They're not being pushed to say that they're in this neighborhood. They're not coming up with the idea to lock up the kid at school and then put him into the school to prison pipeline. They're not making these decisions. It's the people in command that are making these decisions, and the people that everyone votes for. But they're the ones that don't even really get the blame. It's ridiculous that we think that cop came up with that idea on his own. He certainly didn't come up with that idea on his own, and he's certainly going by the procedures that are put in place and monitored by command members. And then when something happens, they fire the guy in charge and they put the next guy up and say, "Oh yeah, we're good now. Reform's on the way."
And the cycle just continues.
Yeah, it's just another one. It's just another one that's creating the same problems. So, like, I don't know. It's this entire reset that must take place.
We then discuss with Mike how a grand jury indictment affects the corruption in the judicial system and plays a part in the policing.
There's an old saying that you can indict a ham sandwich, so anytime a prosecutor can't get a grand jury indictment is because they're intentionally messing up the system. So let's talk about how a grand jury indictment works real quick. So here's how a grand jury indictment works. A prosecutor goes up there, and they only have to tell their side of the story. That's it. So, and their goal is to get charges. So if the charge was that I was talking to you on the phone today, they don't have to prove any of this stuff. They can just say that I was in my house, that my internet connection was on, and that they talked to you and you said it. And that would be enough to get a charge. I mean, that's like, okay, well, that's pretty good evidence that it happened. They could leave out the thousands of other things that would prove that I wasn't even here. Like, there could be evidence that said that I was at Walmart and it was my wife was the only person at home. But they don't have to say that in a grand jury indictment. So you only have to give your side of the story. There's no reason to not get a grand jury indictment. To not get one, you have to go in there and intentionally disrupt the system by doing what they did in Ferguson, where he put witnesses on to tell the defense side of the story, which is not something that happens at a grand jury indictment. What are you talking about? They intentionally, willfully cover it up in front of everybody, and nobody steps up and does. I don't understand how we're just protesting in the streets still. We're not demanding more. It's so far beyond rational understanding. We want to sit here and we want to have this conversation to kind of wrap this up and put a little bow on it and have an understanding. But there just isn't one to be had when the entire system is this way.
I think the problem is that people don't know how much power they really have. How can we begin to even get others to realize the power of their voice when everything works against us?
Well, it's pretty easy. Let's go with this real quick. So, who do the police work for?
The city or the people.
Okay. How do you have a say in what your police department does theoretically?
Imam Wali said we vote for mayor. I said we write to our council person or vote.
Okay. So you elected somebody. Now, there's one thing that we know without a doubt. And
I didn't think we voted for mayor. I thought we voted for the chief or the commissioner.
well, you don't always elect them. So especially in cities, you're going to elect your politicians and they appoint them. So Muhammad's right. Um, the idea then is that you could influence your elected politician who would then control the direction of the police agency. But that's not what happens. Your elected officials in America serve corporate donors, and we know this without a doubt. There's a study done in Princeton, so right there in your neck of the woods, where they had like 9,000 issues that were brought up to Congress and other elected officials. And through all of those 9,000 people, they voted in the interest of their donors, not in the interest of their, what is the word called? Your people that work for you. What is that? Help me out.
I couldn't help them. And that's the problem right there.
Yeah, we don't even know the word. Typical Americans.
This shows us why it's important for us to talk to each other so we can share information, so that we can have control over the systems that are now run by corporations that really do not care about our well-being.
Right. So you don't actually have the control. And that is like one of my big things that I am fighting for. So one of my biggest priorities is to get policing to be directly in the hands of the population. And you're not going to have this stuff anymore. The problem is we have this isolated system that creates an us versus them and is occupation and not integration. So the ultimate goal and the solution for all this, because it's so multifaceted, we want to think of solutions now. But the problem is no one's going to put in our goddamn solutions. So the first priority within policing is to get the population, to get the people in control of the actual direction of the agencies, and then expect your police department to carry out what those expectations are. And one of the easiest ways to go about that is if we all tell the story of a 16-year-old kid and he's standing on the corner slinging drugs because if we've watched The Wire or something like that, you'll see some examples where he's trying to watch his 6-year-old little brother, trying to get him food, trying to get the kid to preschool because his father's in jail for the exact same thing because he was in the same cycle. And then the mother is struggling to even just do anything, or maybe she has a problem. And then that kid, if we asked the public, what do we do with that kid? I cannot imagine that the public says, take that kid, once they know him, take that kid and throw him in a prison cell where he can come out and be a worse criminal. That's just not going to happen. So we would then change our things to say, what do we want to do with this kid? Well, we want to get him help. We want to get him resources. We want to be advocates of uplifting him. That's what we want to do on the front lines of preventing crimes. You're not going to do something where you put him into a system where he becomes a worse criminal, comes out, and will then assuredly commit more crimes. So we just have to you have to get the people in charge of the system. And it might be ugly and it might be clunky at first, but we'll figure it out. And that's what I want to do in Chicago. I want to return the power to the people so we can figure this stuff out. And it's not dependent upon a person or upon a regime. Because if we keep worrying about these laws now, like if we push to have a civilian review board, that's great. You get a civilian review board for use of force as a case, but the whole department's still controlled by somebody else. And when they screw up, your tax dollars are the ones that pay the problems. What do they care? They have nothing to lose. So that's what we have to do. That's the focus, is getting I want you to know that your aunt who lives in the neighborhood was elected to the police review board, not the police control board. I'm talking like a review board, like actually in control of the agency. And you would know that you could talk to them and you're going to get to reasonable situations, and cops are going to come to help. They're not going to come to, I don't make the laws, I just enforce them. You know what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying, Mike. We have to understand how much power we have as people and unify. if the civilians and the police are coming together and they're saying, look, there's a problem, and we're going to Congress and we're going to the people who have power to make changes, I think they need to listen to us over the people who really are not in our neighborhoods and dealing directly with us.
Yeah, I mean, I think completely. So this is why we come back to the front lines. Okay, so my idyllic dream is that I would have like 5 elected people, and let's use the Chicago example. So I would have 5 elected people, 3 of which has to come from the poorest districts, so that way, what's good for the poorest among us is good for the richest among us, and we'll have that balance built in. And then what would happen is we would coordinate. So I might have 51% of the agency, and they would have 49% of the agency control, maybe like a veto or something like that, where we decide on what the goals and milestones are. We argue out the differences, and we try to actually figure out how we can implement those things, establish milestones, and then reevaluate what we've done. And if that process isn't going to result in us flooding prisons with people, well, then there's prisons can just go out of business, or the governor can explain why he isn't getting his quota of people into the prison cells. That's not our problem. So if we do policing right, I don't care about that. That's going to fall as a natural domino.
You are tuned in to Shadow in the Valley with Aria Shalara, and my special guest today is Michael A. Wood Jr. Imam Wali explained how, as he was a young man growing up, if a person, even a police officer, were to shoot anyone that was unarmed, that person was considered to be a coward or a bully.
Right. So let's. So we have a good irony here that you guys may not know. So I base it entirely on fear. I really think that's where it comes from. I think you may have some like bullies, but remember, bullies come from fear as well. It's all about fearing, and what typical society has done is set up a situation where you fear the black man. I mean, that's why they don't get Oscars unless they're playing some violent role or they're a slave, right? So we have that in our society where that's who we look at. I mean, the demons, and they're stronger. Like, there's like, what do people say? Like a different muscle structure. That's why you're faster or something like that. Like, come on, man, get out of here. What are you talking about? But that's what they literally think that. They go, oh, this guy will be faster than me. He can move faster. There's like psychological studies. When they see Tamir standing there, they see him as 5 years older than he is, as being bigger than he is.
Wait, can I say something real quick?
Mm-hmm.
How can they think that when we're super malnutritioned?
Well, yeah, I mean, so it's a cultural zeitgeist. Don't think that it's founded on fact. We're not talking about facts here, So, I mean, it's obviously not true. I mean, we can all open up an anatomy book, right, and know that it's not true. But these are the things that people believe. They still think that their flag is about culture, not hate. I don't know what to tell you, but these are the realities of where they're coming from. So. We can't also immediately dismiss the unarmed shooting. And maybe I'm saying that from my own perspective, because the one time that I was close to pulling the trigger was an unarmed individual. And he was coming at me. I was standing my ground as best I could. And I told him, like, I was giving him a line, and I was saying, like, look, if you come across, like, if you keep coming at me past this line, as I was backing up, like, I'm going to shoot. Like, I don't know what to do. This dude outweighed me by 200 pounds. I was going to lose this fight. So we do have to put those things in perspective. So what we have to be careful of avoiding is when you see somebody, like, let's take Mike Brown and Darren Wilson, where legally, I'm sure that's a justified shooting. But we have to see what happens afterwards, where Mike Brown, you still hear this argument about how big he was and how strong he was, right? Well, that's always a comparative thing. We don't say how big was Darren Wilson. And then you look at Darren Wilson, and he was 6'4". It was, just maybe 50 pounds less than him. That was a big dude too. So, like, the unarmed thing has to really be put into perspective as to who's there and what's going on. Now, the big problem is when somebody is unarmed and you got 2, 3, 4 cops there, you have somebody that's unarmed and they're going away or they're just being crazy and they're not being an imminent threat. We have to change things to imminent threats. So the question then isn't necessarily whether they're armed or unarmed or what they had. It's whether they were actually an imminent threat, and that's what we don't have. What the standard we have is whether the cop was in fear that the person was a threat. We have to move that to a point where they must be an actual threat. So the shooting that I was close to having, what happened was is 2 other cops came and were able to tackle him, and then there was 3 of us and we handled it fine. So the question would, you might not have such a highlight there if it's just me and him, but when you have 3 guys there, then you'd have to ask yourself, why the hell would I pull that trigger? And I didn't pull the trigger because I had 2 other guys to help me, you know?
If you were to think about it, would you have pulled the trigger if your partners never showed up on time?
Yeah, I don't know. Oh, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that guy was bluffing. I don't know what he would have actually, done, but yeah, luckily.
Speaking of guns, I'm a supporter of the Second Amendment right, our right to bear arms.
I'm not.
What about our Second Amendment? Like, we have the right to protect ourselves as citizens.
Yeah, yeah. The part where everybody forgets the well-organized militia part.
I think people should be able to defend themselves, especially if they are approached by someone that is carrying a weapon.
I think, yeah. So I just have to interrupt you because then the obvious thing, you don't come to a fight with a baseball bat and then say, well, to make this fight fair, I would like to also have a baseball bat. You would say, to make this fight fair, I would prefer that guy did not have a baseball bat.
I need a little bit more convincing. I'm still a Second Amendment supporter.
If you were to carry a weapon, a handgun, statistically, if something happened, you would be much more likely to have that weapon used against you than to actually defend yourself with it. And I can assure you 100 times out of 100, if you have a gun on your hip, I will get it away from you every single time. And if you have a knife, I will use that knife against you. I don't need the weapon if you're foolish enough to bring it.
But you're a trained U.S. Marine.
Doesn't matter. There's plenty of people.
You're trained to disarm people. That's what you do.
Your dad's not out there robbing people, I assure you.
Point made. Point made.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a... I don't know. It's taken me a while to get there, but understand that we live in a society where cops are shooting unarmed people because they're so afraid that they have a gun. So they're going to use their gun first. And to think that maybe just the elimination of these guns would be a lot more productive than trying to figure out how we're going to keep people from being the chimpanzees that we are.
Imam Wali then tells Mike of his friend's recent encounter with the police, when the police approach him at his vehicle and ask him for his license and registration, and then proceed to ask him, where's the gun? His friend was bewildered by the question and explained to the officer that he doesn't have a gun and they could search his car. They proceeded to search the vehicle and let him go after they did not find a gun. This is something that happens often in the African American community.
Right. So what you're saying obviously happens 1,000 times over, and it happens to people constantly. And the fear there is what happens with Sandra Bland. So what happens if your friend stands up and says, like, really? Why do you think I have a gun? And he presses that issue. What does the cop do in return? That's where we have that fear. But the topic that you're talking about is called procedural justice. And that means that when police use a routine format to address everybody the same, we all perceive that as fair and equitable. But what they don't, there's no way that they come up to the door and say that to me, right? So why is that? And that, like, the human nature reason is because the dude's probably a racist. But I can't stop racism as a cop. What I can do is enforce strictly procedural justice, which will leave you with a fair result. That's what I truly care about. So what I care about is policies and procedures that will make a standard format that everyone is approached like that, and we'll all be treated the same way so that we all have the same outcomes procedurally. when you have that experience, like that's visceral to you, and that's going to stick with you, and that's why you're telling me that story today. And when that happens, you will tell other people that story, and then it's like sales. So if you go, like, Yelp's all full of bad reviews, because if somebody's pissed off at a restaurant, you're going to go and you're going to tell everybody about how bad it was. But if you had a really good experience, maybe you tell two people. And we have to be very conscious of that, and see how what that cop did to you now sends a message out to 50 people that of how cops treat just people, period. If we can change that so that everyone is treated the same, and you don't have to tell that bad story, then maybe you can only tell two people that the police were nice to you. But that's where we need to be.
Imam Wali then stated, "We'll have one officer behaving incorrectly and then several others that witness it, but no one reports it."
Yeah. We know that happens, right? So, I mean, I spent 11 years not saying anything. I don't have, like, I know we want to hit these human things and like why this happens. And I really think that we think we're better than we are, and we're still need a lot of evolution to go on to get us to a place where we're more empathetic and we treat people differently. So I don't like that. That's just a long haul that we have to make an argument for. When it comes to how to policing, like, we have to make laws where that cop has to say something. So that's a problem. I didn't break any laws because there's no law that says I have to say anything. There's no departmental policy that says I have to say anything. So if we have that public in charge, is the departmental policy going to say that cop doesn't have to report that? Of course it's not going to say that. So that's why we get back to the people actually guiding an agency, because there's no way that if 5 citizens from New Jersey are in charge of the state police, the direction, that they're going to allow orders that say that somebody can do something racist, or somebody can do whatever a criminal act that they're doing, or violate policies, and it not be reported.
I asked Mike if that was the same thing as what they are doing with the Freddie Gray trial, where the courts are asking the officer William Porter to testify against the other officers.
Well, they're trying to compel him. I don't know about all that for legal strategy, because he still, he still has his Fifth Amendment. So, I don't know the benefit of that. What I really want is it to be an offense, to be something fireable. If you don't do these things, you have to keep people feeling close to discipline, whether they actually are or not. And so think about a kid that thinks his parent is watching him all the time is far less likely to steal that candy bar. Just a dumb analogy. But if he has no chance of getting caught stealing that candy bar, like, you're just relying on his own personal integrity. And if we're going to rely on the personal integrity of individuals with the power to be judge, jury, and executioner, I think we have a system that's set up really bad. And one thing I want to point out with Freddie Gray, too, is when we're saying what was his crime, the same question is asked of Freddie Gray. So what is Freddie Gray's crime? Freddie Gray's first alleged offense is making eye contact. So by making eye contact with an officer, he is pursued and stopped, which is ridiculous. But
is making eye contact like an acknowledgement?
Well, it's more than an acknowledgement, because the only reason that case law stands up is because of the neighborhood he's in. So they have like these high crime areas that they designate, and then legally you can it adds to your case to pursue him because he's running. It's not legally, it's not because he was running, it's because he was running in a high crime neighborhood. But again, this neighborhood is high crime and all black because we take the resources away, and we've used hypersegregation and housing laws to put everybody in that area. So now that he's looking at him, and he chases him and they stop him. They search his pockets and they allegedly recover what is technically an illegal pocket knife, right? So this pocket knife, which is spring loaded, is the idea, and that's what makes it illegal. It's not illegal anywhere else in the state of Maryland. So all the counties surrounding Maryland that are full of majority white, and maybe Prince George's County isn't, but the rest of them are all white counties. That knife isn't illegal in any of those other counties. It is only in the city, the majority black city. And then within that city, you have the hypersegregation. So in the surrounding neighborhoods around Freddie Gray, and no one gets arrested for having a spring-assisted pocket knife. The cops carry spring-assisted pocket knives. Construction workers carry spring-assisted pocket knives. And I would be willing to bet that no one in Baltimore City, in Roland Park, Locust Point, Washington, which are all the wealthier white neighborhoods, that have thousands of construction crews going through every day with pocket knives, spring-assisted pocket knives. None of those people are ever arrested, and I'm pretty sure that no white person in Roland Park or any non-high crime area has ever been arrested for a spring-assisted pocket knife. So we get back to what was Freddie Gray's crime.
I always thought that Freddie Gray was being stopped in a routine stop and frisk.
Wasn't even a stop and frisk. They didn't articulate a stop and frisk. People like to do a stop and frisk argument post facto, but he was just grabbed and illegally searched.
Most of us think that we can be searched once we are arrested.
I'm still insistent that you can't get into that pocket. You can't get into his pocket. I've argued with a couple of cops about it. I've never had anybody really step up and make the counter argument that you can. Why they don't focus on that in the trials, I don't know. But you can't get into this kid's pocket. So it was an illegal search, an illegal arrest for the crime of being black in a hypersegregated neighborhood.
We discussed the footage of Freddie Gray's arrest. The courts have concluded that there was no excessive force during his arrest. Yet I saw one of the officer's knees placed in Freddie Gray's back and his legs burnt into a pretzel shape. I asked if that was normal during arrest because that looks extremely painful.
Yeah, so I mean, I was the same place with you. When it first happened, I was pretty insistent that the likely scenario was that they chased him, threw him on the ground, and what cops love to do is drop a knee onto the back of the neck. So I was pretty confident that that's what would have happened, and that's where his death came from. But then it's hard to argue with the medical evidence, and the medical evidence is clear that it happened in the van. So was there excessive force before that? That's probably something that's being overlooked. And I don't know if there's any evidence for what happened back there that you couldn't see. So I think that there probably was. Well, then again, I mean, it was excessive that he was pursued and stopped anyway. I mean, none of that you didn't have any grounds to handcuff him or throw him on the ground or anything like that. So you're excessive technically, but I think we're kind of thinking excessive, like they dropped him and hurt him back there. And I guess, I mean, all the medical professionals are saying that it happened in the van as a result of the rough ride. And to my mind, I'm like, come on, we don't do that, do we? Really? And then after I did the research and you find out that he's the fourth person that has happened to just recently, it's like, well, yeah, I mean, I guess so. Like, I mean, even the seatbelting things, people think that I'm crazy, but I'm like, I don't know. Like, I never saw anybody not be seatbelted. What are we talking about? But obviously it happens. So.
Imam Wali asked Michael if there are any organizations or individuals, or if Mike was a part of any organizations that are currently working to improve the police system.
So law enforcement officer wise and people that are in the system wise, the only place that exists is Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, also known as LEAP. LEAP.cc is the website. And that's a whole collection of prosecutors, cops, FBI agents, the whole cycle, scholars who are completely against the drug war and are for legalization and regulation of narcotics, because I know it's a hard argument for people to get into, but the evidence is absolutely clear that we have to legalize and regulate and get drugs out of the black market. I mean, it's the source of our gang violence, just like it was back in alcohol prohibition. It's the source of taking away lack of economic opportunity. It's the source of overdosing. It comes. It's not the drugs. The drugs have been here for forever. People, caffeine is a drug. People back in the day were doing every drug that they could. Whether it was mushrooms or anything. Almost every culture has drug use in their history, and many of them get along fine and find improvements out of it, just like we do when it comes to medical treatment. So it's a medical issue. It is not an issue for putting people in little jail cells, and we have to move past that. So that's what LEAP is focused on. But with this growing police brutality problem, they are positioning themselves and growing a little bit more to try and explain these things. I am a LEAP member, and obviously, I'm on the forefront. I would probably consider myself more Black Lives Matter than I even would LEAP. But we're all in this, and we're trying to. That's probably your core group that's trying to figure out like how to convince law enforcement to do these things that we see as obvious. And so then go on to other groups. That's all we have for law enforcement.
Imam Wali then asked if the legalization of drugs would be harmful here in America, because in third world countries, the people have access to drugs and are extremely poor conditions.
But they're not legal though, and they're not regulated. So you have to have those two systems in place. You have to have the regulation.
Imam Wali didn't agree with the drug legalization statement, so he made the point of alcohol was once illegal, and look how it affects our community now.
Question is do you think that it is harder for a 16-year-old to get marijuana or alcohol?
Imam Wali thinks both are equally accessible.
It's not. It's much harder to get alcohol. Everywhere you go, it's much harder for a 16-year-old to get alcohol than it is for them to get marijuana. I could get marijuana at any time of day. I could get acid at any point in time when I was 15, 16 years old, but I could never get alcohol. That was hard to get. You could get it because of the irresponsibility of your parents. You couldn't get it from the store. You can't walk into a store and buy. A 16-year-old can't walk into your corner liquor store and buy a bottle of rum, but he can walk up to your corner drug dealer and buy a bag of marijuana. It's just.
Imam Wali disagrees.
I know it's hard to swallow. Wally, you got to stick with me. It's hard to swallow, but in Colorado,
he still disagrees.
Colorado, your goal is to reduce juvenile usage of marijuana. That would be a goal. We can all agree on that goal. In Colorado, for example, the juvenile usage of marijuana since legalization has gone down. You can look at every stat you see in Colorado and have every doubt you have disproven.
We also discussed some of the tactics used by the youth to acquire alcohol, and some of the tactics we also used when we were growing up to get alcohol. But times have changed, and asking someone to cop liquor for you from a liquor store is kind of dangerous. And not only that,
that's a crime, though.
Imam Wali makes the point that it is a crime, but it's still done.
Right. So why do you want to put that kid in prison for that?
Imam Wali stuck to his argument of how, although these things are illegal for us to do to acquire liquor as youth, they're still done. So I had to help out and explain to Imam Wali that although these things are illegal, were easy for him in his time when he was growing up, now things have changed. There are surveillance cameras, and not only that, people aren't trying to risk getting alcohol for some minor. Here's what Mike had to say.
I get you, but today when we have cameras in liquor stores and licenses, no liquor store wants to lose hundreds of thousands of dollars in sales a year because they sold alcohol to some kid, and no parent, no adult wants to get in trouble for that either, because you're going to be on you're committing the charge would be contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Do you want that charge on your record when you go for your future? No, that's like a public scourge now. You wouldn't do that, and we've advanced that through education and regulation. And that's the same. The drug dealer on the corner, he doesn't lose his license because he's caught with a gun. He doesn't lose his license because he sells to a 16-year-old. He just goes through the system over and over. And I get your morality argument, But practicality, it's just, there's no question that the lesser harm is in legalization and regulation, just like it was with alcohol. You want to go back a little bit further to when you had prohibition with alcohol and you had gangsters shooting up your streets. I don't, if you choose to go OD on too much heroin in the corner of your house, personally, I'm sorry, I don't care. But what I do care about is when you go out into society and you make things worse there. That's what I care about. And I'm not going to regulate personal behavior. I'm concerned about people having guns shooting over drug territory.
We then discussed how I'm pro Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, and I asked why the psychological test given for gun licensing wasn't enough to keep guns legal.
Well, I mean, yeah, but again, see, that's the thing is we want to talk about how to change people, mental health issues. So then your argument for pro-guns becomes that we think it's easier to regulate and change human behavior than it would be to just eliminate the gun. And that is not naivety at the highest levels. We're not going to change people, and we're not going to change, passion, and we're not going to change lack of opportunity overnight. What we have to, it's clear that we just have to take the capability away, and that's not something I can deal with. But what I can deal with on a local level is, like, take Chicago, for instance, and you want to talk about regulation. These guns that are in the streets of Chicago that are being used for the gun violence, that are destroying black neighborhoods because we have illegal drugs, are coming from outside of Chicago. It's not a black guy in Chicago manufacturing a gun and selling it to another black guy to go shoot a black guy. These things aren't taking place. The guns come from outside of Chicago. So, like, the gun squads in Chicago, they're excellent. They're some of the best in the nation. They're really good at catching black guys with guns in the city. What I want them to do is catch guys with guns before they are into the city, into everybody's hands, where the violence can take place here. Because then if we focus on locking up the citizens of Chicago that have guns that they didn't get from Chicago, then we are in the practice of putting our own citizens in prison cells because of what other people are doing to our city.
You are tuned into Shadow in the Valley. I am Ariasha Lara, and my guest today is Michael A. Wood Jr. We then had an audience question from Alan, and he asked, due to the many incidents which have taken place between African American youth and the police, our youth have not only become very angry with these incidents, but also confused. This confusion has led them to respond in ways that has become not only detrimental to them, but for police as well. Do you and your colleagues intend on establishing sessions with these youth to help them to deal with the police? And what can the youth do to improve their interactions with the police?
Thanks for that question. Okay, Alan. So I really think that the only way to do this is to lead by example. And so your question is that the youth do not know how to deal with police. So what can happen? Yeah, I find that to be an invalid question. The question is what do police have to do to formulate a relationship with youth? We're doing this in policing all the time, where we like to put things on the community and say, what should the community do? We're the ones with power. It's not for the community to adapt to us. It's for us to adapt to the community. And the why I say that I could do that by example is that there's no other cops, especially white ones, on the front lines of Black Matter protests. Every single activist in Baltimore, if I was running the police agency, even in Baltimore, every single activist in Baltimore would be entirely comfortable with coming up and talking to me and to dealing with issues. It's not for the people. It's for me to change. So it wouldn't be how do the people of any city or jurisdiction learn to operate in the system that's dictated by the cops. It's how do the cops learn to operate in the system that's dictated by the people.
Alan continued, so you're saying it's not the community who has to adapt to the cops, but it's the cops who have to adapt to the community. Well, the activity I've personally witnessed from police in several inner cities, it's rather difficult for me to visualize police having this desire. Do you really believe there exists a willingness for cops to want to do this?
Well, I think a lot of them do have a willingness, though, Alan. The problem is it's the same problem of why they can't speak up. They don't have a system that supports it. In the current system, where an officer is being incentivized by how many people he arrests or how many citations he writes, he has no incentive for his career to spend 30 minutes with that kid on the corner. Because literally what happens in policing is when he's doing that, he's getting pressured to get back out onto the street and arrest somebody. So that's why the problem is in command. What command has to do, and I'm trying to do the scholarly efforts. I'm in my PhD program now, and I'm trying to write down the rules to figure out what these incentives are and to put all these metrics in place. But we have to have a system that encourages the officers to do these things. And if they don't do these things, so then they don't need to be policed. So it has to be that the cops in your neighborhood, they're not being judged off of arrests and citations. They're being judged off the arrest of whether they know Wally's last name. They're judged by the arrest, being judged by whether Alan knows who they are, whether they know Alan's kids' names that's in their neighborhood where they are. And we have things where instead of putting people on overtime to go and arrest people or do a DUI initiative or something like that, we put them on overtime so that they're forced, like in plain clothes, to hang out at the rec center in their jurisdiction. Like that's one thing that I did when I was a young officer, and it had a profound impact on me. So you have to the idea is that all the metrics and incentives have to be focused towards integration. So that's the whole problem, is that I think like people will, like, they want to form relationships. When you end up talking to the kid for a few minutes, you can't help but form a relationship with him as you tear down that wall that says he's an other, that he's a them. So it is truly about having these systems in place that encourages officers to do those and how to hold them accountable for when they don't do those things. And that's why I'm trying to go to Chicago, and I'm trying to make those things, and I'm trying to write down and do the research behind it as a scientist and as a scholar, so that I can prove to people that they can rely on these things. But how do we get there? I mean, I just don't know. It's like this discussion. It's like, how do I get Chicago to say, all right, you can have the superintendency, let's do this? How do I get them to do that? It's like you guys that have to do this in these conversations that have to do these things. It's really about you taking over these systems. I can't force you to take over these systems. I can only encourage you. But when you take over these systems, you can have somebody like me that can implement these things.
Alan then stated, I commend you on your scholarly efforts, as well as your concern in wanting to see a change in a system that, to many, is obviously not working. However, this change of power going from the police administrators to the citizen structure and dictation of police job curriculum appears to be unrealistic. But so did many situations in the past, until persistent individuals diligently put forth effort to bring forth change. So I question, how are you to bring about this unimaginable change? Not to sound negative or sarcastic, but good luck.
Yeah, so I think you are expanding upon what I feel in my heart, and I try to hide, is that I feel like this Chicago thing, if they don't go forward, if it's not now, like if we don't have enough cultural pressure that we finally will make a dramatic change and go forward, then what are we left with? So we keep doing all the peaceful protesting. We keep trying to be the MLK that they want us to be, right? But I mean, I gotta tell you, brother, I'm Malcolm in my heart, and I don't know, like if they don't change, like I'm trying to make it so that all the excuses are gone, and if the system doesn't change without the excuses, well then, I mean, I gotta be honest, we take to the streets and we just keep doing it until it escalates to the point it has to escalate to. You can't let 12-year-old boys be murdered on the playground and fucking have conversations.
Alan then ended his conversation with Michael.
Thanks, Alan.
When I first spoke to Michael, we discussed his plans to become superintendent of the Chicago Police Department. During this conversation, I referred to Chicago as Chirac, and he replied with silence. That silence resonated to me as a slap on the hand, like, don't say that. Don't refer to Chicago with that term. Which I accepted and checked myself, as I have fallen into the promoting of propaganda that stigmatizes the places like Chicago and Baltimore that are hurting. I think we all need to step away from labeling places that are in crisis and hurting from the injustices that are taking place. That moment showed me that Michael had a lot of love for us and Chicago.
Well, thanks. I mean, it really comes from like Baltimore and Chicago are really like the same type of places. And in Baltimore, it has this terrible reputation, but especially since the uprising, the people that I've met, Devin Allen and Kwame Rose and Michaela Gillen Price and Trey Murphy, I mean, I could just keep going on and on and on about these young black leaders in Baltimore, the people that are on the front lines of protesting, and like the only way anyone can have a problem with those that are on the front lines of the protesting is because you've never stepped into a protest and talked to anybody, because these are the best people I've ever met in my entire life, and that's like what it feels like to be family. And I know that those same people are there in Chicago, and like that's we want to shoot for the same thing, but with some power.
I asked if Baltimore and Chicago were pretty much the same.
Yeah, it's same problems, just bigger. Yeah, you take every stat and it's the same thing. Yeah, I think all the cities are the same. People want to argue about it, but we keep seeing that there's no difference between LA and Louisiana. I mean, LA and New Orleans and Miami and Baltimore and Cleveland and Buffalo. And, I mean, it's like Chicago, San Francisco, Oakland. We keep going. They all have the problems. If you go to Ferguson and you hear a list of problems, you could take that list of problems to all those other cities, and we're not going to be able to tell you where you wrote that list.
We then discuss how the police system is pretty much the same city to city and how the school system plays a part in how we as people interact with each other. The example I used was the preschool system. From my personal observation, in the African American and low income communities, we have preschool, which is an integrated program, and this allows children, specifically children of color, to learn how to interact with children and people who do not look the same or share the same culture as them. While in predominantly white communities where preschool is not available, or even if it is available, the children all look the same, which causes the children in those communities to never develop the skill set needed to interact with people who look different from them. I also expressed to Michael that we have to look deep into the history of how these systems were designed and their original purpose. This may be a little hard for us to do, as most of us don't understand these systems.
Well, no, it's easy. So with law enforcement in America, here's a easy way to look at it when you talk about designs. So there was two types of cops in America as it was formulating. You had slave catchers, and then you had those that enforced the laws up in the North, which were specified on keeping the freed slaves, or however you want to use that word, in line with their systems. That's all you have. So policing took that route and they built upon it over and over and over. But if you keep building upon that poisonous tree, all your fruit is going to be poisoned. So you have to go back and do the thing that we've never done before, which is ask, what do you want your policing to be? In this country, this so-called democratic republic, you have never been asked that question at any point in time of what you want the police to be. So that's what has to be asked. I think maybe we had, maybe Martin Luther King was successful in resetting a bit of our cultural understanding, right? So, like, even if you're a racist out in Oregon or Iowa in the middle of nowhere and you've never seen a black person your entire life, like, you still know that's wrong. Like, you know that society says that's wrong. But what we never did is we never reset the institutions. And if you don't reset the institutions, all the actual applications, all your fruit is still going to be from that same poisonous root because we never fixed it. And that's where we are now. We have to fix the systems.
Imam Wali then discussed how the dream of Martin Luther King Jr. was never fulfilled because everyone just looks at it as civil rights and not human rights.
Yeah, they still see it as a black liberation instead of a human liberation.
And if we acknowledge human rights, like Al Haj Malik Shabaz's argument, then we as a people would treat each other better.
Agreed. I think your dream is 1,000 years down the road, though.
Which led us to the topic of trust. I revisited our initial conversation where we spoke about how when I first heard Michael's message and he gained 50% of my trust, then I spoke to him on the phone and it boosted up to 75%. However, as I did my research and learned more about Michael, my trust dropped to 40%, for personal reasons, because one, he's a police officer, and second, because we can look back in history and see what has happened when white people come into the African American community and many other indigenous communities with their ideas of how they want to make changes. So I asked Michael, how will he gain the trust of others in the African American community to trust him at 75% or better?
Yeah, so that's why I talk about with the denial. I think that's the phase we're in where we still have to continue this discussion. And it's not that I have rigid positions or I have some answers. What I really hope I'm doing is getting this discussion to take place amongst more people. It's not that I'm right. It's that this discussion is what's right. So if we have this discussion and you feed me new ideas, which you're going to, I mean, all of this is going to enter my head and change, or at least influence future things. I don't have a rigid position on any of this. Like, this is us. This is our team effort. The idea that I would think I'm better than you is the problem. It's not that. Even though with all the education and all the experience that I have, I've sat down there with Baltimore's activists, some of them, 16, 17 years old, and they would say something, and it's like, God, how did I not think of that through 36 years, education constantly? How did I not put that piece together that was so obvious to a 17-year-old kid living in Baltimore? Like, so we have to have our ears open, and we have to take all those things in and take this discussion. And if we have this discussion and we get it to more ears, everyone's going to buy in. Like, I'm genuine. I don't care whether where you start from trusting in me. You do enough research, you're going to end up trusting me. There's no reason not to. So, I mean, I understand that I have to earn it. I understand, I have to be vulnerable. I get that, and I'm willing to do that, and that's fine. So maybe I'm just the example and give courage to other people to do it. But that's the thing, is like, just let our guards down. Like, be human, be vulnerable, and if you're gonna fight for something, like, go out there and fight for something worthwhile. What I really decided before I went public, and was like it was scary, but what I really decided was that I would rather die having done something than die having never done anything at all. And whatever that, like, this is the calling. And it's not like a calling of my choice. I mean, this is society's calling right now. I'm led here through education and through experience and through friendship. I'm not led here because I have some desire for anything. This is just the end result. I don't know. Just listen. Further the discussion and we'll be good.
I thank Mike for his conversation with us. These types of conversations are very important, and they're key to resolving many of the race issues we are facing. In my research, I really couldn't find too much to challenge Mike's work, because he was answering the questions that I had already without me even asking them. He was a lot more enlightened than I expected him to be on many topics.
Well, get your friends, so once people hear it, there's going to be things that I'm not clear about. There's going to be questions that people will have, gather those up and we'll hit them later.
Will do, Michael. Michael then discussed his involvement with Black Lives Matter.
There's a documentary called Black Lives Matter that focuses on Chicago and Baltimore. And we do screenings of this, and I'm the one white dude on the panel that was the cop, and everybody else is activists. So, I get it a lot, and I really appreciate it. And you can tell them that I really want to be challenged because I want to grow. One of the problems that we have at these panels, and when I'm put on the spot like that, where what happens is everybody ends up just being shocked that they have a unicorn on stage, and they don't pressure the issues. But I very much welcome the pressuring.
Okay, I'm going to bring the pressure next time with these.
All right.
The thing I like about Michael is that he is not just the only person that is involved in Black Lives Matter and fighting for police reform. He also has his family support behind him, his daughter and his wife.
My daughter's getting legendary at this.
I think it's important that we have children involved in these types of conversations as well, like Michael has with his daughter, and many of the other activists have with their children. I think it's important that more parents enlighten their children to what's going on around them so they can have more people like Michael.
No, it's not. It's not. Yeah, it's just like it's not me. It's you guys. I don't really. I'd rather hear your stories more. So get those questions together, get those stories together, and pressure me a little so I can grow. Me sitting on a soapbox. I've done it 100 times. Everybody can hear me on the soapbox. I'm more interested in what you guys have. So take the time, put those things together.
I asked Michael to give out his web address.
I always feel so cheesy doing that kind of stuff.
Okay, I say
So
it
the
for you.
website is okay, cool. Because like it's just not about me. It's so it's like I hate even the idea of it being like these are my thoughts. Like these aren't even really my thoughts. These are just like my curation of other people's thoughts and lessons that they've taught me.
If anyone wants to check out more of Michael's videos and interviews, you can visit his website at www.michaelawoodjr.net. That's junior with a J and an R.
Mm-hmm. And Twitter is where I'm active.
Yes, I follow you on Twitter, and I follow Michael on Twitter, and that is where you can see all the other friends of Michael's, such as Kwame Rose and D. Ray, as well as Devin Allen.
Yeah, Devin Allen, amazing photographer. Everybody should definitely check him out. His work is incredible. He shot the Time magazine photo cover that said 20, it said 1968 or whatever, was crossed out and put 2015 when we had the Baltimore uprising. Magnificent photo, and just a genuine human being who I've become, very, very fond of, and his work is amazing. I really encourage everybody to check it out. We'll be in Philadelphia Friday from 6:30 to 8:30 doing a panel there for his exhibit, and then we'll be back in Baltimore with him this Saturday as well. So he just got a new, what's it called when you have the photo galleries there? Show, it's he has a new art show up in Philly, a gallery, and doing all of his photography. He's had one in Baltimore for a long time, but now they just opened one in Philadelphia, and we're opening it up tonight. And it will be another one of those situations where you guys can go up there and put me on the spot, because that's what Devin did. I didn't even volunteer for it. He just said you'll be so Saturday we're doing this thing up there. I'll put you on the spot. Like, all right, it is what it is.
We thank Michael A. Wood Jr. for allowing us to be a part of his efforts to bring awareness to a subject that is constantly ignored, and for bringing light to both sides of the problem, as well as what needs to be done in order to resolve the issue of police brutality. He definitely gave me a new perspective of an age-old problem that perpetuates separation from all mankind, not just here in America, but worldwide. I hope this message falls upon the ears of the men and women in power, as they may be able to produce and implement ideas that will bring about changes to the system that are literally destroying our progression as citizens in the United States of America.
Thank you. I totally agree. Thank you guys.
As we closed, Imam Wali thanked Mike for his work efforts, as well as those that have joined with him. He thinks that when the public understands the possibility of Mike's efforts and what it can bring, then we can become better Americans towards one another. So when we stand with our countrymen and give our pledge of allegiance to the flag, as we say of this great country of ours, one nation, under God, with liberty and justice for all, that our words will be sincere and not facetious.
That's absolutely true. Wonderful words, but when you bring up that anthem, I would like people to take notice that on my Twitter page, you will see that I have Tommy Smith and John Carlos on from the 1968 Olympics as my background, because if there's anything I would love to see people to do is to sit there and stand up and put that glove on and do the Black Power while that anthem goes on, and protest to it until it is justice for all. The idea that we stand up there and say that stupid thing when we say justice for all when there certainly is not.
The preceding recording is a narration of the January 28th, 2016 conversation with Michael A. Wood Jr. and Arya Shalara and Imam Wali of Hut Info News on Shadow in the Valley. Edited by Afaf Muhammad